Hi, welcome to A Word to Wives. This is Donna. Back in 1965, a group called the Righteous Brothers released a song called You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling. And it was a pretty big hit back in the day, I guess way back in the day, 1965. But if you're not familiar with the song, it's about a couple who had this great love for each other. But over time, the wife has lost those loving feelings for her man. As the song says, they are gone, gone, gone. And so he's singing to her to bring back those loving feelings. Well, love lost is not an uncommon theme in music and is certainly not uncommon in marriage. Many couples experience a season where they've lost those loving feelings. I remember a time like that for Raymond and I, and it's so memorable to me because it was during the time of our third wedding anniversary. And we went out to dinner to celebrate, but I tell you, it was not a celebration at all. I mean, there was no talking about how we first met. There was no reminiscing about the beauty of our wedding day. There was, no reaching across the table, holding hands, no laughter. We just sat there. And back then, we didn't have cell phones to distract us. So we just kind of sat there trying not to look at each other with this cold silence between us. It's one thing to have a season where you've lost those loving feelings, but it's another thing when that's been the state of the marriage for years and there's been no change. Raymond and I often come across Christian couples who, instead of experiencing the loving, fulfilling marriage that God wants for them, they have settled for this mediocre marriage that's filled with, irritation with one another and frustration and isolation in the marriage. And, many of them exist more as enemies than lovers. And they say things like, I don't feel respected in this marriage, or I don't feel loved, or, my expectations are not being met in this marriage, or a big one, I'm not happy. And so they use that to justify, rejecting their spouse and remaining isolated from their spouse. But, the question is, how do couples go from being so in love with each other that they vow to, stay together until death separates them, and then get to the point where they can hardly stand each other, or they don't really speak to each other, or they're isolated in the marriage, or they're even considering calling it quits? Well, we know that that doesn't happen overnight, does it? It happens gradually, incrementally, one disappointment at a time, one hurt at a time, one disagreement at a time. For some couples, it happens because there's just been so much conflict that they can't resolve. And so they keep having the same fights and the same arguments over and over and over with no resolution. And then they get to the point where they're just exhausted. And so they begin to withdraw from each other. In other couples, maybe it happens because they have hurt and wounded each other deeply. And they're just too proud to say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And so they become deadlocked, and he thinks he's right and she thinks she's right. And so they just are stuck and they begin to withdraw from each other. Other couples, it happens because they're so busy, just busy, busy, busy with kids and with various activities and pursuing their careers. And they stop doing those things that nurture the marriage and keep the marriage healthy. And they just kind of slide each other to the back burner. And so over time, the marriage is just no longer a priority. And then there are other couples who just kind of wake up one day and discover, you know what? We don't want the same things in life anymore. We are not on the same page. We are moving in two different directions. And she's doing her thing and he's doing his thing. And so they just become distant from each other. And these are all common things that can happen in a marriage if we're not intentional about pursuing oneness. Now, if you're not familiar with that term oneness, it simply means moving through life together as a team. Okay, it's about unity, moving through life together. If you're in a marriage where there isn't oneness, but there's isolation, and one or both of you have lost those loving feelings, and they've been lost for so long that you don't even know how to bring them back. If that's the case, I want you to know something. I want you to understand that there's hope. that you don't have to stay stuck in, marital dysfunction, or you don't have to stay on that crazy cycle that so many couples find themselves trapped in. There's a verse that I want you to hold close to your heart. And you might be familiar with the verse. If you're not familiar with the verse, you're certainly familiar with the words. But it's Jeremiah 32:27, and it says, I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? And we know the obvious answer to that question is no. There is absolutely nothing that is too hard for our God. We serve a God who is amazing. He is almighty. He is all powerful. He is sovereign. He is great. And there is nothing that is too hard for him. And it's baffling to me how, as Christians, we recognize that. We sing God's praises. We talk about how amazing his grace is. We talk about his ability to answer prayer and to meet our needs. And won't he do it? But when it comes to healing our broken marriages, we act as though he's impotent. Or, we study our Bibles, we go to church, we try to grow in our faith, but then we allow our marriages to be a hot mess, and we justify hard-heartedness toward our mates. Marriage is important to God. It is so important to him. Marriage is supposed to be a reflection of Christ's relationship with the church. And so it's important to God that our marriages represent him and that they represent him well. We can never control what our spouse does or doesn't do. We cannot control what they say or don't say. We can only control our own actions and our own responses. And so I'm going to ask you a very serious, thought-provoking question, and that is, will you be willing to be a catalyst for change in your marriage? Will you be willing to say to God, I surrender. What do you want me to do? Raymond and I can tell you from personal experience what a powerful, powerful choice that is, and how it opens the door for God to bring about, change and healing in the marriage. Well, if you are willing, I hope that you will join me next time. I would love to share some words and some insights with you that I sincerely hope and pray will be the beginning of bringing back those loving feelings. Well, this is a word to wives. I hope that you will comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you next time. God bless.